don't worry so much about the borders between Syria and Iraq and these foreign borders, and we should be more concerned about our own borders.
Thank you.
You take a pro-life position. What kind of what kind of policy would you like to see enacted regarding abortion, and enacted federally, on a state level, both? Just in general, what are you looking for there?
Well, I consider abortion an act of violence, and violence is one thing the government has a responsibility to curtail. But for the most part, all acts of violence are handled by state law. Murder and manslaughter and accidents and all kinds of things. All criminal activity, crime, robbery. So therefore, I think they should deal with this issue, and it's a more difficult issue than just plain murder. And therefore, it should be worked out at the state level. So I don't want the federal government to do it. The federal government should never tax one person, which is really a pretty vicious violation of a right to life individuals to take their money and give it to a hospital that's committing abortions. That's why people get very worked up over this. So we shouldn't be providing any funding whatsoever. There's one thing the federal government could do to move in the direction I want, and that is to move in the direction of a bill that I have called We the People's Act. You just remove it from the jurisdiction of the courts. You don't need a constitutional amendment. You don't need to wait for Supreme Court justices. It's interesting that many of the right to life groups have not, particularly given me support for that position. They argue we have to change the Supreme Court, we have to have a constitutional amendment. But they could, in the meantime, say, well, let's just remove jurisdiction. And if New Hampshire decided to be more restrictive on abortion, they could. They could prohibit it. They could just make it more restrictive, and lives could have been saved. But for some reason, the right to life movement generally doesn't get behind that movement. They just sort of allow this thing to linger and on and fight for constitutional amendments, and how long are you going to wait for Supreme Court justices to rule a certain way, and besides, they're not obligated after they're in office anyway. So I don't like that approach. I think the limitation of jurisdiction should be the way to go, and you could do that for other things too, like for marriage and prayer in school. Let the states assume this responsibility the way it was supposed to be.
Can I add something to that? So let's go back to the fact that it's up to the states. But if you consider it an act of violence, and in that way you're saying treat it like a criminal act, I would suppose you're saying. So who would you prosecute, the woman having the abortion or the people giving the abortions? I mean, you're going to throw pregnant women in jail?
I'm not going to be in that determination as a federal official.
But you're a congressman of a state. If that were your state, what would you do? Throw the woman in jail or the doctors?
No, I don't have a simple answer for that, because I think it's very, very difficult. Nobody has an easy answer for that, because in spite of the fact that I believe that life begins at conception, and that anything I do to the unborn as a physician, I can be sued for. So we know it's a legal entity. Or if there's an accident, you're liable for killing a fetus and killing the unborn. So I would say that it's going to vary. If somebody takes, I don't think there's any way you can legislate against taking the day after pill, because you can't prove there was a crime. You can't even prove there was a pregnancy. So legally and biologically, you can't prove it. So you certainly would have a different penalty for that than what if somebody is 9 months pregnant, has an 8-pound baby, and her boyfriend left her. She says, I don't want this baby. And she goes to the doctor and gets paid money for this and aborts and kills the baby.
8-month abortions? I don't
Sure,
think
they're
so.
legal.
Yeah, but how often does that
happen?
But
the principle is 100%. So you can't avoid that by saying, oh, well, yeah, early abortion's okay, but not in the third trimester. Third trimester, they're legal. Maybe it's only 4 pounds. The principle is there. Roe versus Wade legalized it in the third trimester. So the principle is there. So are you going to do it? Or should you have a law and say, oh, no, don't do it? The court said you can. But hopefully even the abortionists wouldn't be so unethical as to do something as horrible as that, and yet under the law they could do it.
I just don't think that really ever happens, but thank you.
Well, have you ever heard of partial birth abortion?
Yeah, but 8-month fetuses.
Well, what about 7 months? What about 6 months? What about 5 months? We can save a baby weighing 1 pound. We can save a baby at 1 pound. And unfortunately, it does exist, but the principle is very important. If you don't have an understanding, but this whole idea that one time a doctor did an abortion, and the baby was born alive, so he drowned the baby. He got arrested for murder. He was convicted, not in prison or anything, but he was convicted of a crime. What about the young girl who delivers a baby and drops it off and the baby dies? She can be arrested, and is. But before the baby was born, I could be paid to do it, whether it was at 2, 3, or 4, or 5, or 6 pounds. You can't say the argument, well, they're not going to do it at 8 pounds. Well, probably not. But the principle is established there. It's an important issue on what life is all about. This has nothing to do with privacy. This has to do with what is the responsibility of the government to protecting all life and defining life.
Well, your proposed legislative approach, which would remove the jurisdiction of the courts, aren't you concerned that any legislative remedy could ultimately be overturned by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional itself?
On certain things, I guess that's the case, but the Congress is supposed to act wisely, remove the jurisdiction on only the things that are popularly supported. If they started removing, matter of fact, I think in one of these anti-privacy bills, the bill, said that the Supreme Court couldn't rule on that, and they were using it in the opposite way. What you're suggesting, I can't remember, it was the Patriot Act or the FISA courts or something that was a violation of civil liberties by the federal government, and then saying that I guess it was these secret prisons and habeas corpus, that you don't have the right to go to the federal court. Yeah, that is a danger, and that's why you have to do it with some common sense. But for us to write that into the law and say that, and I'd have to argue, they had the authority to do that. But boy, that is horrendous abuse. I mean, that's really violating the whole concept of the government protecting our privacy and our rights.
With regard to stem cell research, is it accurate to say your position is that you could support expansion of stem cell research, but not federal funding of same? Is that right? That's
right. In a debate that was asked me, and I said that in Washington you only have two choices. You either have the opportunity to ban it or subsidize it. Well, why not look to the Constitution and the freedom? Just legalize these ideas and allow people to do it and do research. That's sometimes it becomes more difficult exactly when and where, but under the Constitution, the states actually could fund it and they could permit it. But I have a personal belief from my medical background that stem cell research is very, very important.
And you don't see any inconsistency with that position and your sort of absolutist position on abortion, given that these are embryos?
Yeah, but you said stem cell research. You didn't say specifically, you didn't describe embryos being cultured in dishes in order to do it. There's a lot of stem cell type research from umbilical blood.
Right.
And I see even embryologically, I've had to operate on women who have had a tubal pregnancy and a small embryo, which is alive and very normal, and it's really an eye-opener to see. You look at it on the ultrasound and you see a little fetus there with a heart beating, and yet there's an absolute rule on that. If you don't deal with it, we know the fetus can't live, and we know the mother may well die, and so we take them out. I cannot see any reason why, under those circumstances, to say, oh, well, it is nature, it's God's will that this has happened, therefore we should, say that we can't use it, So I would be open to, because there's difficulty in figuring this all out, that's why I don't want the federal government either subsidizing it, because subsidizing it means you're taking money from people who find it abhorrent. At the same time, if you prevent it, you prevent things from coming up and solutions that should be worked out at a local level. And actually, ethical conduct would sure help us a lot in the way this happens. Matter of fact, ethical conduct would help solve the problem of the third trimester abortions too. That there's a limit.
Congressman, with regard to Iran, I know you've been very vocal in and critical of the president for some of his statements. But what should the U.S. policy